Welcome to the Malachi's Message Foundation and its Toxic Mold Sucks Stories, where we want people to know that toxic mold is a real danger and threat to not only your health, but your home, your finances, and your relationships. We want to raise awareness about toxic mold by showing you the real damage it does to the people, families, and children it affects, and the process they go through after being impacted by mold in order to regain their health, their home, and their lives back. Hi, welcome to Malachi's Message, Toxic Mold Sucks Stories. I'm Elizabeth Kripe. I'm a co-founder and executive director. Today, co-hosting is Emily Rochelle. She is a co-founder and board chair for Malachi's Message. We have the unique privilege and honor to hear from Shelley Brandt, to hear her story. You will hear very quickly into it that she is a warrior mama. She will fight for her family like no one we have ever met or talked to. Shelley, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Shelley, before you get into your mold story, can you kind of explain to people what your life was like before living in a toxic home?
Yeah, I mean, my husband and I together, we have 5 children. They range in age today from 10 all the way up to 25. At the time, we had 2 in high school. One was getting ready to graduate high school, but involved in all the sports. I was the team mom for many years. I sat on the board for the local football and cheer association for many years. Um, Driving my kids back and forth from football practice, cheer practice. And then when the younger 2 started getting involved in some things, I took on some of that responsibility. They're actually my husband's kids from his first marriage. So, but we had them quite a bit. But we were super active when my husband and I first met. We actually met at the gym. Go away. Um, and our dating started like at the gym, and we actually decided to do triathlons together, give them a try. um, I was an avid swimmer my entire life. I think I started competitive swimming when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and up until about 4 years ago I was still swimming 20,000 meters a week. um, Even after having one of my shoulders completely reconstructed by a surgeon, within 6 months I was back in the pool. So it was something that I absolutely loved. I actually taught my husband how to swim, because the first time I saw him do it, I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to drown. um, he's I'm still better than he is though. But we were just really active. We always had, I told him that, our home was always going to be the home where all the kids came, because it was really important to me to know who my teenagers were hanging out with. I needed to know their families. So I had people over all the time, and I cooked for these kids. I still get messages. I mean, they're all 25 now, and I still get messages about them about, I'm going to be in town. Will you make this for me? Or where'd you get that cake? Or, one of them loved that chocolate cake from Central Market. So I would still give it to them whenever I could. So, but we were very active. My husband is an avid runner. Um, he's done full Ironman triathlons, which, I think is insane to do, but he loves it. And he's an identical twin, so he has that competitive factor in there all the time with his twin. So, but and I've always had, my house is the central point. I have family that lives pretty close to me, quite a few siblings around the area, and my house is the central point. So when we have birthdays or holidays, or just because, it's everybody comes to my house. And because I'm a little bit of a control freak, I like to have like the whole meal done by me. So but yeah, we're just a very, very active family all the time.
And then mold. Would you mind jumping into for us your mold journey?
um so I'm sorry, they're just ringing my doorbell. The dog's gonna go bonkers. So we bought this house, we designed it, we picked out everything, and we anticipated that that house was going to be the house we were going to be in forever. When we picked out every little detail, it was because we knew our kids were going to be growing up, they're going to be moving out, and they would be bringing their kids back home and visiting us. And so everything, that house was supposed to be forever. And ended up not being. And I actually didn't know it was mold for quite a bit. Things didn't change like overnight when we moved in. My house was changing, the physical house was changing. Like I was seeing the wood flooring, it was peeling, and it had a very smooth finish, and you could see what they call the grain popping. And so there's all these subtle changes that were happening. And I would bring the builder out because this is a brand new home. And the warranty guy would look at me and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, but the baseboard's swollen right here. And that means there was water. No, because it would be yellow if there was water. And so I was like, okay. I mean, my husband and I are not technical, but we're not people that can pull out a hammer or something and fix anything. We're the kind of people that have to call people to do that for us. And we relied on our builder to guide us and be honest with us. And I think that was one of the hardest things. But it was within a year of moving in, my daughter started having just difficulty eating certain foods. So like all of a sudden she couldn't have chips and queso anymore. And all kinds of dairy just sent her body into just being sick. And then I started feeling that way. I would come home from the pool every morning and I would make an egg white omelet with spinach and feta cheese. And then all of a sudden I would make that omelet and my stomach would expand so much I looked like I was 5 or 6 months pregnant. And I don't come from a family where we have food allergies. I've never had food allergies in my life. I don't even have seasonal allergies. So this was just very weird that we were all experiencing this. My youngest son was about 4.5 years old when we moved in. And all of a sudden he started getting just respiratory problems. And you take him to the doctor and the doctor gives you a prescription for an inhaler, some antibiotics, and you go home and you think you're fine. And then I started getting sinus infections. My daughter started getting sinus infections that were recurrent, where I would be on antibiotics, I would be okay for 2 weeks, and then I'd have to go back on. And that went on for a while. And I went to see an allergist. At first I thought, well, we kind of moved out into the country a little bit. There's a little more green space and maybe we are allergic to things. Maybe that's the problem, is that, there's just so much more grass and everything around us that we're having problems. So I took the 2 children and I to see an allergist, and she's like, yeah, you guys are allergic to a lot of things. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. I think I was 44 at the time, or 45. And I was like, that's a little odd to sort of, all of us sort of develop them at the same time. I just thought it was very weird. And we continued to get sick. And there was an incident at the house where in my husband's office, he had 2 plastic floor mats down to protect the wood flooring from the rolling bars on the chairs. And one day he happened to look down and there was water underneath the mats. And, we didn't know what was happening. I mean, there was a bathroom above us. There was a PEX system in that wall. And, I went out and looked and there wasn't a leak in the PEX system. And, I couldn't tell if there was a leak in the bathroom through the walls or not. But we called the builder out. That was a Sunday night. The builder came out on Monday. And they concluded that we were putting water on the floor and putting the mats down. Didn't bother to look for a leak of any sort, didn't go out to the PEX system like I did and check. They just said, and my husband asked him to clarify, he said, "Are you telling me that you believe we picked up these mats, poured water on the floor, and put the mats down?" And they said yes. And so what happened in that flooring was it bowed really bad. And anytime we'd walk in there to do anything, we'd cut our feet on the wood. So I went in there and I cut out the parts that were raised up that we were cutting our feet on, and I could see it. There was mold. And I didn't know much about it. So I got one of those test kits at Home Depot that you can swab and send off. And it said, "Yep, that's mold." Didn't tell me what kind of mold it was, but I just didn't know any better. So, I mean, seeing the mold was essentially the last piece of the puzzle for us. And I had gone back to the allergist and I told her, I said, "Look, there's mold growing in my house." And, she kept trying to treat us. She tried several COPD medications on me. We tried several different asthma medications on my son, and nothing worked. And she finally said, "I want you guys to leave your house for 10 days. And I told her, I said, "I don't think we can leave for 10 days. But so I drove my two kids out to Santa Fe, New Mexico for about 7 days, stayed in a hotel when I got back, and went back in to see her the next day. And she rechecked all my symptoms and she did a pulmonary function test again on me. And there was a difference. And she asked, "How do you feel being out of the house?" And I said, "You know what? I feel quite a bit better being in that house." And that's when everything sort of started to click for me, because that afternoon I went back in the house for the first time in over a week, and almost immediately my the only way I can describe it is it's not just my throat closing up, but it feels like my entire neck and then my brain swell, and it's almost immediate. And then you begin to wheeze. And at this point, I had already stopped swimming because I just couldn't swim anymore. I didn't have the lung capacity or the function to swim in the manner that I've become accustomed to and that I've known my entire life. So, I mean, it just, and we just continued to get sicker. My husband, my oldest son was in college at this point, and he would joke, he was on the East Coast, and he would joke that if he didn't call us by 6 or 7 o'clock our time, that he wasn't going to get a hold of us, because there were so many days where my husband and I were in bed at 6 o'clock at night, just exhausted. And I mean, I hadn't been doing much of anything during the day. At my sickest point, I would get up and help my youngest son have breakfast, make him lunch. He would beg me not to go to school. "Mommy, I'm so tired. I don't want to go to school." But by this time, I knew there was something wrong with the house. And I knew being outside of the house was the best place for him, even though he fought me every morning, and you feel like a horrible parent, forcing your child out the door, when they're begging you and telling you they don't feel good. But it was the house that was making us so ill. But I would get him ready, and I would lay on the staircase by our front door with the door open, and he would be out at the bus stop in our front yard. And as soon as the bus came, I would shut the door and I would essentially crawl back to bed and just sleep. And I really didn't realize like how sick I was until like my husband's deposition. And I was sitting in on my husband's deposition, and my husband said that, you know, I lost my wife. My wife was bedridden. And it just, you know, because when you're going through it and you're just trying to get through it, you just don't realize how bad you really are. You know, I think even now, I don't think I've really sort of processed what our family has been through and how bad it really was. It took my mom a couple years to tell me that she thought I was going to die. She left us one time and she cried to my dad and she said, "This is going to kill her." So I just kind of lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry.
Shelley, how long were y'all in that house?
So we moved in on August 1st of 2015, and we did a remediation in February of 2018. So it was just over 2 years of living in there. And it was getting worse every day. And the problem with our house is the vapor barrier that's underneath the concrete slab, the foundation, was somehow compromised. And we had water coming up through and just saturating the slab foundation, which it comes up through the foundation, it just disperses through. I mean, because concrete really is like a sponge. So all the wood flooring downstairs during remediation was pulled out, and it was covered in mold. And it was the engineered wood flooring, so you could peel the layers apart. And so it wasn't just mold on the bottom layer, it had mold in the layers of the flooring. So it was just, it was stunning when I saw it. When they pulled it out of their house, I was like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. So, and then after remediation, we moved back in, and I just happened, we were living on a concrete slab that was stained black from all the mold that had been cleaned. And my husband had put some plastic down to protect our furnishings that were left. And just one day by chance, I noticed something in our bedroom, and I picked up the plastic sheeting and I touched the slab, and it was wet. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is still a problem. And then there was my husband and I, we had two-car garages. I had one garage, my husband had the other. And we were in my husband's truck and we were backing out, and I'm looking at the garage that had already been remediated, and I see this big black blob in the ceiling. And I tell my husband to stop. I'm like, stop. And of course I'm looking at him like, how did you miss this? You know, and you have to understand my husband's a workaholic. So, you know, him pulling in and out of the garage without knowing his surroundings is a very common thing. But I walked back in to the master closet, and where we had already replaced all the sheetrock, and there was mold growing everywhere again. And I broke down and cried. I told my husband we're never going to be safe. And we immediately started looking for a rental property, a property to rent. We ended up using my husband's VA loan to buy a house because we couldn't find something in the school district. And then that house sat vacant it's still vacant, but the next 3+ years that we were in arbitration with the builder.
And just so everybody watching knows, we do plan on having Shelley come back on at a later time and talk about the arbitration process. And there's so many unknowns about that, and there's so many things people don't realize when they're thinking about arbitration or they're looking at going into arbitration. So that is an entirely different topic that we are very excited to have her come back on for. Shelley, when you guys found out it was mold though, what were your emotions at the time? How did you feel? Was it relief? Was it just a mixture of a lot of different things?
Yeah, I mean, I think I went through the whole process. And so I remember growing up, and I think it was in the 90s, there was black mold cases in Texas. And so I remember hearing about black mold. And that's what I was seeing in my house was it was black and it was mold. So, at first I was very scared because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to proceed. I didn't know how to get my house tested. I didn't know how to get my kids and I doctors that we needed to see. I didn't know anything about it. At this point, I thought mold was just an allergy. You can be allergic to things. I had no idea how, devastating having mold in your home from water damage, how devastating that is to your health. I had no idea. So we went through we went through all kinds. We were angry with our builder. We were frustrated. We were bewildered by, their actions, blaming us for putting water on the floor. I mean, that just defies logic. People, when they buy their home, they usually take care of their home. They don't deliberately do things to destroy their home. At least, we don't. But I think the worst part, and probably one of our worst days as parents, is um, we got in touch with a doctor that understands mold, and we were advised to do these mycotoxin tests, and I was the first one to do it because at the time I seemed the sickest. So we were like, well, and it's relatively expensive. So we did that, and it showed up in my lab results. And so then we had my husband and my son take the test, and I got their results at the same time. And I opened my husband's results first, and it's kind of like, yep, it's there. It's right there. And then I opened up my son's lab results, and it was really bad. Um, he's our baby. He had poison in him. And as parents, you're supposed to protect your children and keep them from harm. And here we were looking at each other, crying and realizing that we put our children in this house. We put us in this house. And my husband still has a lot of guilt about, buying that house, even though, we didn't do anything wrong. I mean, but you as a parent, you can't deny it when it's in there. You're looking at it black and white. And we just decided whatever we have to do, whatever we have to cash out, whatever we have to sell. And we did. We ended up selling rental properties, and we had to hit our savings. And because nothing about toxic mold is inexpensive. Nothing about it is inexpensive. It's from remediation to the physicians that treat it to what you need to do to treat it. And our priorities were making sure our two children got the treatment. And I mean, my husband, literally, we had a conversation and looked at each other and said, you know what, we've had a really good run. So I'm cool if we can only pay for getting the kids treated. I'm fine with that, because we've lived our lives, and we've lived really good lives, and we made that peace with ourselves that was okay. As long as our kids were going to be okay, we would be okay. So, but I think I've gone through like all the stages of grief, because you lose everything. I mean, it's not that we just, had some walls ripped out. It was, you couldn't keep things. My daughter, which I believe you're going to interview her as well, big journal. She's a huge writer. I mean, I'm so proud of her. She was getting emails from NYU's writing English department as a freshman in high school. And so All her journals had to be left behind, family photos left behind, disregarded. I mean, the only thing that we have from that house, and they were able to salvage it, was a piece of furniture my grandmother brought back from Portugal in the 1970s. And it's my favorite piece of furniture. And man, the things they had to do to get it back in my house, it took over a year. But I'm able to have it in my house now.
So how has life changed for you now? Are you guys still at the point where you're able to do a lot of the things you're able to do before, or is life still in the process of healing and changing and adapting?
We are still in the process of healing and adapting. And I think that there's some things that are never, I just think there's some things that we're never going to be able to do, like eat anything with gluten, eat any dairy, eggs, none of that stuff. My daughter and I still can't eat any of it. It just wreaks havoc with our system. And I kind of chuckle because I'm like, yeah, it's like putting Humpty Dumpty back together again these last few years, because everybody, the four of us, are sick in four different ways. We have overlapping health issues, but my daughter is predominantly neurologically affected, where my youngest son is his lungs are mostly affected. He was neurologically, we all were, but it's very weird how it completely affects. It makes four people sick in our home, but it made us sick in four different ways. And so that makes it really hard to figure out what's happening with your family. If we all of a sudden had respiratory issues, that would be easier to do and to treat and to figure out what's going on. But when, each person has 20 different symptoms and some of them overlap, but not to the degree. And it made it very hard, but we're still in the process of healing and recovering. I think it's actually just going to be a lifetime. I think it's just a new way of life. I don't think we're ever going to get back to who we were and where we were before. I mean, it's changed relationships. It's changed our health. It's changed my daughter's entire course. I mean, she graduated high school with an associate's degree, was at Dallas Baptist University, and she was on an accelerated master's program, and life stopped for her. I mean, it was abrupt, and she went from being a phenomenal student to not being able to retain any information and failing, which was really, really hard for her. And she's putting her life back together. And, she just completed, she's a licensed esthetician now, and she has her laser license, and she absolutely loves what she's doing. She really does. And she's finding peace. If you get a chance to talk to her, you will find her a much more forgiving soul than me. I've learned a lot from my daughter these last couple years about forgiveness and trying to make peace with all that. She's pretty remarkable. So she's just, because I would have to say that her life changed the absolute most. I think she was 16 when we moved into that house. And so, she really didn't get to launch and go out with friends because she was always so tired. And she's 22 right now, and she still lives at home. But she doesn't have the energy to go and do things. And she was in her best friend's wedding, and it took her a couple days to recover. And I just don't think that's ever going to return.
I absolutely love that you said you think it's a lifelong process. Because so many people that we've either talked to or that have asked us questions, how long does it take to recover from mold? And that's not the right question. Like, how are you going to be able to adjust your life to mold now and to recovery and to the healing process? And it just changes the course of your life in so many ways. And your story just shows that so definitively. I love that people get a very clear picture that it's not something that you don't just get a pill and it goes away and you're all better.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No, I mean, through the arbitration process, I still had to go over to that house and let experts in or let opposing counsel in for inspections and stuff like that. And I haven't actually walked in that house in years, because all it takes is for me to be standing next to that house, and I let them in through one of the garages, and it hits me and I'm down. I can't function for days. And that happens if I go into certain buildings in my community where, I want to shop or something. There are certain places that are off limits to me now that I know, because they've had water damage, and I have a reaction when I walk in those buildings. And it's like starting over every time that happens. And so it's not something, it's a complete adjustment on your life. It's never going to go away. It's always going to be there. And you're going to get better and you're going to get better. And then you're going to walk in some place that you don't know. And you're going to go back 10 steps. So
Yeah,
it's,
I remember after the same thing, right? You're just tanked. And I remember after people thinking we were crazy, because my husband or I would call a building and say, have you had water damage? And they're like, what? Why do you need to know that? And we're like, well, we can't enter your building if you've been affected by the latest hurricane or if you've had water damage. And it's such a different lifestyle that unless you've been through it, people just, they don't get it.
no.
They don't get it.
The
So,
first thing I do when I walk in somewhere is automatically my eyes go to the ceiling, and I'm scanning the ceiling looking for water damage.
yeah.
And I'm looking on the floor looking for something there too, because I have to do that in order for me to walk in and feel like I'm somewhat safe being in there. But yeah, it's a total change. And now I'm like surprised at how many buildings actually have water damage, that it's not fixed.
And for people listening, I hope you heard that they had a new house. So it doesn't mean that just because it's a new building that there's not going to be mycotoxins or water damage or toxic mold. Like, they bought a new house and they still went through this. Shelley, what would be the one thing, and I know it's going to be hard to do because we all have so many things now, but what would be the one thing you would want people to know about toxic mold?
I guess the biggest thing is the misconception that it's just an allergic reaction. It may start out as a little allergic sniffle here and there, but once you dive into what happens, you understand that mycotoxins have the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, and they will, and they do invade every system of your body. And when I say every system, everything from your hair, my hair fell out, broke off. My daughter and I we both gained a ton of weight. Our skin, your skin's your biggest organ. That took a long time to heal. But people need to understand that it's not an allergy. And if you have somebody in your family that is suffering, it can be just one person in your home that's suffering. Take them seriously. I'm very lucky that my husband, because he was the last to get sick, that he never questioned whether or not we weren't feeling well. My family never questioned what was happening. And I've heard so many people express that their family members think they're crazy and that it's in their head and it's not real. It's very real. It's very real, and your body is being poisoned every time you're in that environment. Your body is being hit with these toxins, and they degrade your immune system. And think about what mold does in the environment. Its sole purpose is to eat away, okay, this just completely slipped my mind.
Digest. Its complete purpose is it's basically the recycling system of the planet. It
Decompose.
Decompose.
That's what I was thinking. Thank you. But that's what its sole purpose is. And so it doesn't belong in your body. But that's what it does. And that's what I would hope people would understand and have a little more compassion and empathy towards the people in their lives, especially if they're not the ones suffering. Just ask them what they need, and you just believe them. Do a little research. It's out there. It's not easy to find, but it is out there.
Emily, do you have any final questions for Shelley?
I could ask her so many questions. Shelley is one of those, troopers that have gone through the gauntlet and came out the other side. So I would, no, because it'll make this thing a lot longer. But I just want to say, Shelley, you're an amazing person, and what y'all accomplished as a family going through this whole nightmare path with your builder is just amazing. That y'all came out on the other side. So
we did, and we really firmly believe that it happened to us for a reason. And this is something that we can talk about with the arbitration, because we had the means to go through it, and hopefully us going through that has paved the way for other families, or maybe given the builder a reason to sort of take their homeowners a little more seriously and not dismiss them, or not give them some ridiculous excuse. But we want to take what we've been through and use it to help people, help them get through the process, or hope that they can avoid the process altogether, because it's not a process I would wish upon anybody ever. So,
well, we're excited to have you back on later on to talk about the arbitration process and what goes into that. All right, I think we are good to go, and we will see you again. Shelley, thank you so much for joining us today. This was amazing.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Emily.
thank you,
Thank you, Jocelyn. She's a good girl.